Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, just want to welcome you to the webinar. We're going to get started here in about 6 minutes. So we're going to wait for a few more people to join us. And then right at 5 o'clock Doha time, we will begin. So. We'll be starting here in just about a minute. Hi, so I want to welcome you today to the first of EAC series of webinars under the umbrella theme, Keep Children Learning. This is a set of webinars that we have decided to put together as part of a presentation on our response to the COVID-19 crisis. Today's webinar has a particular focus on distance education in low or no digital areas or no tech areas. We are very proud to have 3 of Educate a Child's partners with us today that implement our projects in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and in Mali. Before we go too much further, I do want to draw your attention to a few housekeeping points. You will notice that our webinar administrator, who may join us later, Ryan has muted all of the participants. Hi, Ryan, and attendees. The session is being recorded so that we can share it on our website. There is a question and answer function, so you can post questions at any time during the presentation. However, I would like to point out that at the end of the session, after we have a bit of a moderated discussion with our panelists, I will open the floor for questions from attendees. At this time, you can raise your hand in the chat function or in the participants list. Ryan might need to clarify that for me. And he can unmute you, so you can then pose your question directly to one of our panelists or to the panel as a whole. We encourage you to do this. We think it will make a much more dynamic exchange between those of you attending and the panelists, and maybe have some back and forth in the question and answer section. So we do encourage you to make use of that hand raising function so we can unmute you and you can verbally pose your questions. There will be, I think, a handout that can be shared, so do look for that. Ryan will be sharing a document for all of you during one of the presentations as well. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with Educate a Child, let me just give you a little bit of background so that you know who we are. Educate a Child is a program of the Education Above All Foundation. We are a foundation that is located in Doha, Qatar. We were founded by Sheikh Moza bint Nasser in 2012. The foundation itself, it consists of 4 large programs: Al-Fuhura, Peace, or protecting education in conflict or in emergencies and conflict, Rota, Reach Out to Asia, and Educate a Child. The mission of the foundation itself is really to ensure that the most marginalized children and youth around the world have access to educational opportunities, especially those who are experiencing poverty, crisis, and other forms of disadvantage and discrimination. EAC's mandate is to ensure that the most marginalized out-of-school children in the world have access or the opportunity to access and complete a full cycle of primary education. And with that in mind, our partners really do focus on reaching the most marginalized children. These could be children that face barriers such as being part of a nomadic community, the geographical barriers, being part of an emergency situation such as a war or insecurity or natural disasters, children with handicaps, and so many other things. when the COVID-19 crisis really started to hit all of the countries around the world, we all experienced and found that school systems responded by basically shutting down. And so what we had to do was go back to our partners and ask them, how is this affecting you in your programs? Because, and most especially, how is this affecting the children that we have already identified and gotten into education programs, and that are the most likely then to no longer participate if education does not continue. So it was imperative to find these ways. So our partners came back to us with a multitude of plans and responses on how they were adapting to the current situation. And oftentimes this meant trying to adapt in-person, face-to-face education provision to a distance education system. We saw this around the world. Many in low-tech or low-tech areas and with very little connectivity. So how is it that those organizations and partners that are mandated to reach the most marginalized, those children that have little opportunity to connect digitally or virtually, respond to a situation where face-to-face learning is not possible? That's the question we asked our partners to respond to today. So I am proud to say that we have 3 of our partners who implement very directly on the ground. Tariq Chima from Alight, formerly ARC, or the American Refugee Council. We have Safika Islam from BRAC in Bangladesh. And we have Simon Richmond, who is from the Education Development Center. I will let each of them say a little bit more about themselves and their organizations before they present. But to start us off, we're going to start with Dr. Tariq Chima from Alight, or ARC in Pakistan.
Hello.
And Tariq, if you could go ahead and turn your video.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and we are very grateful for Education Above All to organizing this conversation, which I think is affecting almost everybody who is involved in education, and particularly to out-of-school children. Alight, previously known as the American Refugee Committee, has been working in Pakistan for last 18 years. And one of our major undertaking at this point is our out-of-school children program, and we are immensely proud to have our partnership with Education Above All. And our program is the Pakistan's largest ever out-of-school children intervention. We aim to enroll 1 million out-of-school children from across the country, from all regions, and this program was started in 2018. So currently we are in the last year of our program. So looking at that, any situation like COVID-19, which is going to suspend the activities, is obviously of major concern. And we are looking into the other various ways of how to mitigate this problem. So imagine putting 1 million kids into the school is a huge task from the beginning. And at the end of the December 2019, which is the second year of the program, we have already enrolled 816,000 children. And one thing I would like to mention, that this program, being the size of it as a huge program, not one organization can do that. So we have had partnerships with the federal government and provincial governments and a few other non-governmental organizations to make sure that we do not call it or treat it as an out-of-school children project, but we make it a movement where everybody is welcome to join so that we can achieve a big target. So having 816,000 children already in the system, and most of them were either dropped out or never been to school, and here comes the COVID-19. And so this could be a potential setback to a program which is well underway in terms of achieving one of the big target. So if you look at the slide briefly, I will just let you know that one of the most amazing things for us is that we have achieved a higher number of girls enrollments, and which comes to 46%, the age group of 6 to 16, and you can see we have 26 partners, a very broad partnership, and involvement of the schools and teacher is also big. The overall impact, the direct and indirect impact is also given in this slide. We are almost through this program, together with education above all, and through the Educate a Child program, are reaching out to almost 3 million more people. So this is the program, and I think we can quickly go now to really what this conversation is about. Next slide. So as this pandemic happened, and this is, of course, it was something completely unexpected and at the unprecedented level. I think all of us has perhaps never observed something which can impact the world alike, from one continent to the other, from rich country to the poor, from developed to the developing countries. And education system has come to a halt. So for us, the challenge is still there, that we still have to add at least 200,000 more children into the program. But at the same time, we are also worried that how to keep and retain all those children that we have brought into the system with a lot of hardship. So when you look around and you see the solutions, you come to a number of options. And because we are living in 21st century, technology is very advanced. And this slide basically will tell you what we have originally envisioned, that what is available for us, what vehicles are available to us to reach out to the children to make sure that their learning or their education is not hurt. But then I think out of 816,000 children that we have enrolled, majority of them are living in the parts of the country where internet connectivity may not be regularly available, where there might be a power outages, so which can also make it so difficult for people to have a television. And while we get overwhelmed with the advancement of technology and so many edutech companies are doing phenomenal work, you sometimes have to stop and say, let me go back to the basics. And I think that was our learning when we thought that without wasting any further time, we will do what is doable. So we have thought of starting right away with our radio program under the name of Muallim Radio. And through this program, in the less than 6 weeks, we were able to put 30 sessions on SLO-based in Urdu language for grade 1 to 3. Now, this is an open source. It is available on YouTube as well. And you will see that in the next slide, that we decided that rather we get overwhelmed and distracted by this broad spectrum of options available. Some of them, of course, are very high tech, high cost. Why not we should go to do the doable and go for the low cost, high impact intervention. And I'm excited to tell you that we have seen and we have been getting news from various remote parts of the country that people are now getting their old radios fixed, because now they find an opportunity where their kids can be engaged for 2 to 4 hours every day, and they have this remain engaged. So our learning is really that schooling may stop and learning must not. And with something that we also thought would be an obsolete technology, and we have been amazed at how some of the old technologies become so relevant in certain extraordinary conditions. So I will stop here, but simultaneously we are now working the similar program for the grade 4 and 5 and hope that in about 2 weeks we will be able to broadcasting this program as well. Thank you.
Sabrina, unfortunately, you're on mute.
Oh, no wonder Tariq was just looking at me. It said it was unmuted on my end, I thought. So thank you, Tariq. I'll just repeat what I was saying to myself. I will go ahead and save my questions for you until everyone has presented their interventions and the way they've adapted to this really unprecedented time that we're facing. And I'm going to ask Safiq Al-Islam from BRAC to go ahead and join us so that he can present what BRAC is currently doing.
Thank you.
Good evening from Bangladesh, and I welcome all of you to the BRAC presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start with the thanks to education above all for organizing this event, a very timely event. I would be taking you through the BRAC strategy on education that we developed as part of our response to COVID-19. This is a three-phase strategy. You would be pleased to know that this year, BRAC education program in Bangladesh alone plan to reach 3 million people, including 750,000 children who study in the schools operated by BRAC. So far, the BRAC school ecosystem produced 13 million graduates, and more than half of them are girls. My presentation today would be limited to the 24,000 schools that operates in Bangladesh. Due to COVID, the government of Bangladesh declared all schools closed on March 23rd. Within a week, the government took an initiative to open a distance learning modality through Parliament TV. And I am pleased to share with you that BRAC partnered the government of Bangladesh in designing and developing the content which are necessary for the TV-based broadcast. However, we quickly realized that only 56% of the households have access to television. And bulk of the children who study in the BRAC school, who are mostly in the rural and remote locations, do not have access to TV. Subsequently, it will not serve their education purpose. Fortunately, 95% of the households in Bangladesh has a feature phone. So we opted for an intervention, which we call home school, that provides education to the children through a virtual mode using feature phone, and the education goes in group of 3 to 4 children. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This is the home school. So the teacher, a rural lady, has been trained on the operation of the virtual classroom organization. And the curriculum has been updated to include COVID-related content, including social distancing and well-being of children. The phone class takes 15 to 20 minutes at a time, and it is organized 1 to 2 a week at this point of time. I'm pleased to let you know that so far, 2,500 schools, including almost 70,000 children, has been brought under the home school operation. Next slide, please. About the experiences, parents are relieved and seeing that their children are connected to the learning world. We can imagine majority of the children's parents represent a learning environment in the country. Children are also happy that they are connected back to the school and excited to a new experience, learning through phone, which is happening first time into their situation. And it also helps to reduce the divide technologically that between the children who have access to TV-based lesson and the children who do not have. However, we are confronting challenges. The biggest challenge is the short learning hours. The next is the poor connection, which often makes disruptions. And finally, the cost of schooling. Per minute cost comes to 7 cents, multiplying by 750,000 children a day, multiplying by 3 to 4 in a group. Next slide, please. So how do we plan the whole transition? The transition that we started the work right away now has to take place the moment the COVID-19 comes under control. But we see that immediately we do not go back to the new normal, and that's what we define as a transition. So in the transition, classes would be taking place in 2 to 3 shifts, ensuring safe social distance and safety of the children. The limited face-to-face class will still be challenging to ensure the right quality that the children desire. We are developing an innovative solution which we call Children Learning Group, who would be working outside classroom on right hand of the picture that you see. Not only to compensate the loss of school hour, but more importantly, this is their world of learning. In the Amartya sense, the Nobel laureate's language is the freedom of learning. Next slide, please. Finally, the moment the situation comes under fully control, the life will go back to the new normal, but that would not be a pre-COVID normal, because the experiences that we have gained during COVID would be continued, particularly the children learning group who continue performing outside the classroom. The use of technology, which would be used by the teacher to facilitate outside learning classroom situations. And of course, a dearth of interest, a lot of interest on the evidences that we would be generating through research. At the national level, we are committed in BRAC to support the government of Bangladesh by bringing all dropout children back to school in a shorter period of time. And to that end, we have developed a new school model, which we call fast track school, which combines classroom regular activities outside classroom activities undertaken by children's learning group, and finally, a smarter technology solution. In conclusion, what we started doing through a feature phone, we hope that it would be ending with a smarter phone and a new world of learning where children are more empowered and autonomous learning. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Safika. There's lovely to hear what BRAC is doing in terms of not only adapting its responses and its ways of teaching and learning to the new this new world that we're kind of living in with COVID-19 and the need to socially distance, but also how you've already started to plan for what will happen when schools start to reopen and children can come back into the classroom. And it is very evident that there will be a new way of working and a new way of going forward. The old ways of doing things, well, basically will no longer be. So it's good to see the forward thinking that BRAC is having. And with that, I'm going to ask Simon Richmond from our partner Education and Development Center to please join us and let us know what EDC has been doing in terms of interactive radio programming around the world. Thank
you. Hello, everybody. Pleasure to spend this time with you today. My name is Simon Richmond. I'm joining you today from the United States. And it's been a great pleasure for Education Development Center to be working with EAC in Mali, where we are implementing the Pakatan Project for them. And I'll come to that in just a second. EDC is an American NGO which has been working in education and health since 1958. And we do a lot of curriculum development and teacher training here in the US. And we do even more overseas across the developing world. In Mali, we have been working with EAC on the Pakatan Project, and perhaps Ryan, we can advance to this next slide, which is largely focused on enrolling and retaining children in school. It's a large project, $70 million project, and it involves the coordination of approximately 12 NGOs, both local and international, to deliver a wide variety of educational services to Malian children. As you know, Mali is a conflict zone, and working there can be quite a challenge. And that's one of the things we have appreciated about EAC is their understanding of the fluidity of that situation and their willingness to be very flexible with the programming changes that need to be adapted in real time. One of the services that children are able to receive in Mali when they're in classes is education via radio, which we sometimes call interactive audio education. And that's what I'd like to speak to you about today. Can we advance here? IAI, interactive audio instruction. What is that? Well, it's a simple means of using a radio to deliver educational content into a classroom. But instead of that content being delivered in a lecture format or a one-way format, we try and make it interactive. And we sometimes talk about a triangle of interactivity, so that the radio is giving directions for the children and for the teacher to complete while they're listening. So that means that sometimes the children are responding to the radio, sometimes they're responding to their teacher, and sometimes the radio is talking to each of them as well. So by building time into a broadcast, you can move children from a passive state into an active state, and they can be engaged in their learning as they go forward. Normally we do this with songs, games, we create storylines, we create a fictional world. It's very similar to the television show Sesame Street, but it's more closely tied to academic outcomes. And you can teach the entire curriculum through a radio show like this. Now, it's been very effective. Over the last 30 years, EDC has done this in many countries, and we see consistently a large leap in learning gains. We see closing of gaps between learners. Gender gaps are closed. Girls perform just as well as boys. Social and economic status gaps, language, location gaps. When you create an IAI series and you think very carefully about the conditions of the children and you model the ideal behavior through the radio characters for those children, you can improve a lot of the conditions, the educational outcomes for those children. You can also improve the teacher skill because the teacher, the live teacher, is listening to the radio teacher and the radio teacher is modeling the ideal behavior. Can we proceed? On this next slide, you'll see some results, and these are in a handout, which I think Ryan is going to share with you. So you can look at these a bit more closely. Since we began in Mali just a few years ago, we've only managed to complete up to our baseline. You can see we've already got more than a 12% gain. We've only reached up to our midline, sorry. We've already got a 12% gain over baseline. In a similar series in Congo, in Democratic Republic of Congo, you can see here how many children are reading at grade 2 level, are reading up to the grade 3 level of standard. Only 2% of the control group, but more than 20% of children listening to IAI are exceeding 1 grade level above. Now, IAI has been produced in many countries, I think almost 30 countries around the world by EDC. You'll see a map of some of those countries in your handout. And we have been very pleased in this COVID period to be able to release that catalog of recordings for general use, for free use under the Creative Commons license. So if an educational system is trying to deliver programming via radio into homes, because children can't be in school, they can find a series of programs that was perhaps recorded in their country, or maybe from a nearby country, which can be adapted for home use. Let's jump to the next slide and I'll show you what I mean. We first discovered how easy it was for IAI to be used at home a few years ago in Liberia during the Ebola crisis, which closed schools on a much smaller scale, as you know. We already had a program on air. It was a youth program. And of course, youth could no longer gather in their informal learning centers, but we kept broadcasting and we encouraged them to learn at home with the help of an older family member. And this is the picture that you see here. The gentleman on the left is the student. He has an older sister, or maybe it's an aunt on the right, and they have a radio in the background. There's not much more that they need, some pens and some papers, but otherwise the instruction is being delivered by the radio. And instead of listening passively, this student can interact with his older family member, respond to the radio in time, and continue with his education, even though there's no school infrastructure, no trained teacher, and none of those services. So it's very easy to apply this model, which we did in an emergency situation a few years ago, to many other school systems. And we are let's go to the next slide, please, Ryan. We are trying to raise awareness that these programs are available, and we are trying to encourage ministries of education to repurpose the IAI recordings wherever possible. Now, you may not find a series that's in your language, but you can that's from your country, but you may find one that's in your language, and you can find ones that might teach the same subject levels. The important thing is to try and figure out how to take something that's already been previously recorded and deliver it in an equitable fashion to continue the educational experience of your learners. Now, I would encourage people who had the time to produce their own IAI series from scratch, but unfortunately there's a lot of planning that's needed beforehand. And so it's much easier to repurpose something quickly than to have 6 months to a year to produce something custom. So in order to repurpose, we have produced this repurposing toolkit, which is available on our website. And we are encouraging people to either come to us to get a copy of an IAI series that you want to use, to look for it on the Global Digital Library, which is where USAID has coordinated a repository for all of these programmings, or you can get it from USAID yourself. very often these programs have been funded by USAID in the past 20, 30 years. So they have been leading the charge to collect them in one central location. There's our website, edc.org/audio now. You can see a master list of all the recordings and download some of these resources. So that is my presentation. I'll just forward you to the next slide so you can see that web page again and see my contact information as well if you'd like to reach out with any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. That was very insightful, and I'm really interested and like to see the way that EDC has adapted something that you've previously used in a crisis situation or an emergency situation, and instead of trying to reinvent everything, made it applicable to what the world is facing today, and especially to those really in the most challenging situations or in the most challenging areas of the world. At this time, I would like to ask all of our panelists to go ahead and turn their videos back on and come back on the screen, and so that we can have a bit more of an in-depth discussion about the work you're doing and ways forward, challenges, etc. Safika, Tariq, if you wouldn't mind putting your there we go, videos, and you can unmute yourself. All right, now that we're on. So I want to thank you all for the insightful presentations. There are a few things that came to my mind as you were presenting. One of them is so while these are interventions that are fairly low tech in a lot of ways, they are not no tech, and they do require a bit of technology to be able to access them. And so if you could speak a little bit around what you think can be done to reach that last 5%. Safika, you talked about having phone coverage in about 95% of the country, or that your students have about 95% basic phone coverage in Bangladesh. And I would think if we extrapolate, probably not everyone has radio access as well, or there's not broadcast service to all parts of the country. So if you can respond a bit to how you think we could also reach out to that last 5% or 3% that is still not covered by some of these interventions that we've adapted to.
Thank you, Sabrina. And it's a very good question indeed. The access to information is a project under the Prime Minister's Office and BRAC with the Ministry of Education. We already started answering the question that you have been asking, that what to do with the 5% who do not have access to IT technology. So community radio is a solution that we are taking up. So that would be the one we would be using to reach those 5% of the children. But more importantly, the reason we are talking about the EAA forward and the future kind of situation, we need to address the last mile children's needs in terms of technological solution. And that has to take place in a very planned way. And that is the reason that we started really working for the next 3 to 4 year strategy. And almost there is a consensus within BRAC that we are going to pick it up as a strong advocacy point, to do the advocacy with the policy developer, policy formulators, as well as the development partners to invest to the level it requires, so that every single child, we can tell that you matter to us, and we take care that there is no divide between you simply because you live in a remote area compared to the fortunate one who is in the urban areas. I dream that day come into existence, not so long it will take. Thank you.
I think we all dream that that day comes into existence. I do want to go ahead and ask if Simon and Tariq, if you have anything additional that you want to add to that, please feel free.
I do, but please, Tariq, you first.
Well, thank you. I mean, we are, I think, operating in Pakistan, and like Bangladesh, we have a huge population to cater, and which is always a big challenge. And we need to be very pragmatic. Of course, we do dream that, you know, no child should be living without access to education. But, you know, we are still in that state of emergency where governments are still grappling with what would be the best ways of preventing their mass population from the COVID-19. You know, should we have a you know, smart lockdown, or should we have a very, you know, stringent lockdown? And there are so many things going on. So for us, you know, we are taking our approach into two steps. First of all, we were not that lucky as much as the organizations of my fellow panelists here who have been involved in some level of technology and other means to provide education. We have been working already in the remotest part of the country, where whether it is a cell phone penetration, whether it's the connectivity, has been very limited. So we have been using very conventional approaches through community mobilization, you know, pushing kids to the schools and things like that. But on a very short period of time, we have started some activity, and I think what we are trying to do is to learn from others, to leverage other people's experiments. And then in a country which has a federal government and then it has a provincial governments, sometime another major challenge is where is the sync between their policies. So I think we have yet to see how alternative education delivery is going to evolve in Pakistan, and how perhaps we can sync ourselves with those departments that we are working closely. But given our resources, we are planning, as I said, we rolled out the radio program in the beginning, but we are also working on other mediums, how we can reach out to more and more people. Right now, although we are in 200 million plus country, our very much focus is on the million kids that we have been trying to engage and bring and induct them into the education system. So it's ongoing experimenting, learning. We cannot claim that we know everything and we have found the solution, but we have every possible will to marshal the resources we have to see how much damage control we can do. Thank you.
That's a good point. Simon, do you, in response?
Yes. From the early days of IAI, we have been broadcasting on radio. In fact, IAI is often referred to as IRI, Interactive Radio Instruction. But ever since, I would say, the early 2000s, when MP3 players became readily available, we also began loading it onto a physical media player and donating a device to a rural community or a migrant community. This was not new. I think in the 80s, a lot of IAI programming was distributed on old cassette and played by tape. But it's easier to manage a single small MP3 player and a set of rechargeable speakers. So even a community which does not have maybe cellular connection or even a radio signal, if you can access them physically and donate that device, they can then listen, and it has its own advantages because they can also control the schedule of their listening. They can listen to multiple programs a day, or they can repeat a program, or they can pause and rewind and listen again. So it is fairly straightforward to give them the programming in a way that is accessible to them.
Thank you. I think that's so important, is to try, I think every one of you touched on the idea of really adapting to the communities we work in, flexible programming, as well as experimentation and learning from others and leveraging their experience. And not only learning from others, but learning from our own experiences in the past, and how we've done things for other situations and how they can be adapted. I do want to ask, so what has been your biggest challenge in delivering the interventions or strategies that you've adapted to community? This may be something in the regulatory basis for broadcasting, the coverage, but if you could name one, there may be, you know, hundreds, I don't know, but the one that comes to mind is your biggest challenge in what you're delivering and how you're moving forward.
Perhaps I can begin with. Well, I think our biggest challenge is that we are still living in a very active state of pandemic, and this whole precautions like social distancing and lockdowns and things like that are making our efforts, really slow, and we need to be somehow coping with these challenges. As long as the accessibility to technology is concerned, or developing the content, I think that is an area that we are well covered. But engaging people and then bringing the children together, especially if they are living in the communities where not every household can have access to a piece of equipment or device or gadget that can allow them to learn, you somehow need to bring, and I like the way BRAC has been very conscious about their model to keeping the social distancing. So I think it is more of the logistic and the overall environment and what we are living in, but otherwise I think technologically we feel pretty okay.
Anybody else want to respond to the challenge question?
Let Simon talk first.
Thank you, Savik. I think one of the largest challenges we face is an assumption that almost every culture around the world makes, and that is education happens in school. And when schools are closed, education cannot happen. Obviously, the first educator of any child is the parent, particularly the mother. So education naturally happens at home. And parents are, I think, are intimidated by the idea of academics, having to teach academics. And so getting them to embrace this idea that learning can continue at home through the help of some other intervention, maybe a cell phone or a radio program. There's many different ways to support that parent. But their role goes beyond simply paying school fees and making sure the child leaves the home on time. And then the system or the teacher takes over responsibility thereafter. I think it's challenging to get them to change their notion of what education can look like, and then to trust the materials that we are all trying to provide in different ways. Because it's a strange idea that a child can learn through a cell phone or through a radio, or through the games that they're being encouraged to play through these different approaches. So learning to understand that education can happen at home, and it can be very rich and interactive, and learn it through play. That's an unusual idea for a lot of parents to understand.
Thank you.
Let me join both Tariq and Simon. For us, one of the most important thing is the kind of believing that education through distance mode is equally a good education. It's a mindset issue. And in our part of the world, there's a big issue that how do you change the people's mindset? Because our policymakers, policy developers, ourselves, we are all product of a conventional school system where learning mostly assumed take place in the schools. So this is one of the major challenges. The second biggest challenge is the evidence, what Tarek and Simon both touched. Because if we want to do a strong advocacy in favor of a transition or a change, what you need is the evidence and solid evidence. And this is one area where the evidences are not that strong. There is a dearth of good research which would be showing that the net gain from the distance educations are equally, particularly at the basic education level, as good as it happened in the school. And for a country like Bangladesh, the third biggest challenge is the cost of distance education. The phone school that we are now working is a pretty costly one because the telephone companies have not designed their services keeping the education needs of the children in mind in the pre-COVID. It was essentially a service for as a telephone. Now, this is an area where we need strong policies that it has to be, special discounted rate has to be made available for the distance learning. And what Tariq was pointing out, the whole penetration. The penetration just not cell phone. The penetration, frankly speaking, should be the internet penetration in the remotest part of the country. And that brings the million-dollar question, is the commitment. Commitment of the nation, commitment of the government to the education. Fundamentally important that we all understand that the loss that is happening now due to COVID, and we know from Ebola, we even know from the earthquake that was in Pakistan, where the school system was closed roughly for 3 months, and children were fall back by almost 1.5 years when it was checked after 4 years of their earthquake. So this we need to be very clearly saying that it's a high cost implications if we do not really opt for remedial situations to compensate the losses that the children are now suffering due to COVID. So in total, the biggest challenge is the commitment that every single child matters, and the policymakers, the government, and all of us have to demonstrate that so that people can see it.
Thank you so much for that. I think the Safikal, on the last few points, you've really hit on something that Educated Child has been trying to make really a piece of the international and global dialogue on education, and that is the cost of not educating all these children that are out of school, and how great that cost and how much greater that cost is to nations than the actual cost of educating them. And I do think that we cannot ignore that, and the high cost implications of not focusing on every single child's education and making sure that those last percentage, the last mile of children get an education is so important to take into account. Simon, both you and Safikal kind of gave me some segues into my next two questions, one of which is the role of parents. So if as the panel, you could kind of talk about what you see as the role of parents in the delivery of the programs, the IAI, BRAC's new telephone-based programming, and even the radio programming that Alight is currently doing. And how do you work around the issues of low literacy or low education levels within a family in some of the places where these programs are being delivered in order for the families and the parents to support children's learning? So that's the first question I want you to address, and I'll go ahead and pose the second one, which is also around the idea of what research and evidence do you know of distance education or your programming working? So for those of you, like, I think Tariq, it may be a little early to say since this is a new program, but what do you know is out there that shows that these are effective programs? The role of parents and families in the delivery of these programs.
Simon, you may start.
As you wish, sir.
So I've had a trainer in the past who's told me there are two ways to volunteer. You can either volunteer yourself or you can be volunteered. I think you were just volunteered.
I was voluntold, yes. It's an important question that you're asking. And I think to understand it best, it's helpful to look at what a teacher is. You can really separate a teacher into a large number of different skill sets. One of them is content knowledge and a mastery of the information. And that might be challenging, especially to an undereducated parent. But there are many other skills that a teacher is using day by day, which any parent also has. The ability to ask questions, the ability to listen and to provide encouragement, to provide feedback on an answer, to know what a child's priorities are and what their interests are, and to approach a topic from the perspective of that child. Many of these skills parents are better at than teachers because they know the children better. So when we produce audio instruction, interactive audio instruction, we try and separate the instructional skill of the teacher, the pedagogical and the methodological skills of the teacher, which are delivered by the radio. Because these are programs that are designed for use by low skills teachers, by undertrained teachers, which are very similar category to the parent. So if the instruction is delivered by the radio, there's still a live role and expectation of the undertrained teacher or of the parent to do these other things, to make sure the child participates and answers the questions, to encourage them when they're doing the work itself, to police, to oversee the directions are being followed, and of course to encourage, provide feedback on all of these other things. So there is a lot that a parent can do without understanding the content at all, that will assist the child to learn. Regarding literacy and a low literacy parent, that is a very challenging issue. What we do with audio is we provide directions to the listening adult, be it an older sibling, a parent, or a teacher, to transcribe things. We aren't able to provide printed materials often, but when we want them to practice reading, we will dictate a word to be written on the board or a sentence. And so we do assume a level of literacy that a parent can be able to form letters or write what they're told, because often with a spelling word, you don't mention the word, you actually spell it out letter by letter. You say C-A-T, and then you ask the children, what does this say? So sometimes digital materials like a text or a WhatsApp message that the parent can receive before the broadcast to show what they're supposed to write, show how they can form the letters, even if they are not very literate themselves, it's possible.
Well, thank you for that. Safiqal or Tariq, do you want to add anything?
Yeah. Now, in our part of the world, one of the fundamental thing that the generation that we have now, the children who are going to school, their parents, many of them do not have a formal literacy, formal education, and at home they do not have a literate environment subsequently. The second is the poverty. Many of these parents of these children, they are struggling for their livelihood. It's almost, hand-to-mouth situation that they confront. So subsequently, in order to have a conversation with a child about their education, this also requires an environment at home. When in the context of school, we call enabling environment for learning. A similar environment is indeed needed also at home, an enabling environment when you can really go for a conversation with your children that what you are learning at home. And for years, this is an area that we have not really given due attention, that how to create an enabling environment at home for the parents to have a meaningful engagement with the children, particularly checking their education, their well-being. And the assumption was that things are okay. But lately we understood that things are not okay, because with the changes of the generations, we are confronting very different realities. So this is one thing that we need to prioritize. Joining Simon, what does it mean operationally? Operationally would be meaning we have to design a program, how to reach parents in order to keep them engaged with their children. Blessing in disguise was the COVID. Before we started the phone school, we were forced to have a conversation. We mean the teacher of the school, the BRAC staff on the ground, to have a more meaningful conversation with the parents. Because classes has to take place through phone. The child does not have a phone. The phone owner is a parent. And the parents will go out, they are not at home. So we had to reach them that when classes will take place, you have to leave the phone to your children. And initially we requested that, look, this is a new experience, because education through phone was not a usual routine exercise to most part of our community. So fortunately, they were also excited to see that how the education classes takes place through phone. So the trade-off was, they had an excitement, we needed their phone. So when they stayed at home and were connected their children through phone to have a conversation with the teacher and with their peer, 3-4 peer who are in the group call, it brought, it was an eye-opening exercise for the people like me, like Simon and Tariq, who really work on designing the program. And the level of appreciation we got from the parents. And then we requested that now you can leave the phone with your kid, but please, when you come back, get your phone back and check with your children what they did during the 30 minutes when you left the phone at their disposal. Since it matters to them, because it's a capital for them, capital investment for them, that has created a space for checking how they learn, what they did learn. Is there any way that the parents, because the children told the parents, the teacher asked the child to convey to the parents to take care of their safety during COVID. And what it requires, use a mask when you go out. What it requires, the hygiene. So that has created, the whole blessing in disguise, a better engagement between the child and the parents, but it requires us, on part of the designer of the program, the content developer, that how we take it forward in the new normal and in the transition.
So important to keep that in mind. Quickly, Tariq, if you have anything additional to add to that, and then I'm going to open this up to attendees. So attendees, if you have questions that you want, you can start raising your hands or posting those. Before Tariq answers, I do want to draw your attention to the fact that Ryan did share the handout that Simon had mentioned in his presentation. That is in a handout section of your kind of control screen, or I'm not sure what it's called, but the control panel, where you can also ask your questions in the chat box. Sorry, Tariq, please.
Well, I'll be very quick. Just want to bring one point to everyone's attention, that the impact of this pandemic on education will play out very differently for the people who are living at or below the poverty line versus the people who can afford the decent or reasonable education for their children. Mm-hmm. So even in one society, we probably would not be able to have one size fits all. And we should be customizing or tailoring our, the alternative education models based on those communities we serve. So for parents, I believe that the teaching would be as important as parenting is. And I'm sure the parents who are educated will overcome this, and they will adapt to that change very quickly. But our focus is very much onto the people who are really struck by poverty, and then we have to see they have become even more vulnerable today, and what technologies, collaborations, resources can be deployed to make sure that they have not gone further deep into the vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to ask Ryan to let me know if we have any questions from our attendees that I currently cannot see. So Ryan, please let us know if there are any questions, or I think I can see them now.
Sure, my pleasure. We have, I shared the attendee list, so if people put up their hands, Nancy Devine had put up her hand. If I'll unmute her, if she would like to speak, she can.
Nancy, welcome to the presentation. I am hoping that it's not a question for Simon, since you two are from the same organization. But feel free to pick his brain.
As soon as I said something, she put her hand
down. Oh, anyone else? Do we have any other hands? Because I think it would be really nice to have some interactive questions from those in attendance.
We have Frida, and we have
Frida
and Ade.
Go ahead and unmute Farida, and let's see what her question is, and then Ade is next. And if Nancy would like to go ahead or anyone else, please go ahead and put your hand up.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, this was a very interesting and useful meeting. So, I mean, I think my question is more about, I mean, we've seen a lot and read a lot about the negative impact of COVID-19 on the educational systems. And generally, I mean, we know that beside the immediate negative effects that crises have on people and on educational systems, they also provide an opportunity. An opportunity perhaps on the longer term to improve education systems, to enrich the learning pathways. I mean, you've been discussing the use of radio, the internet-based teaching, phones, pathways that are generally perhaps not available in times of non-crisis. So my question is basically about what opportunities do you see that this crisis is bringing to the educational systems and to the children in the countries you operate in? What can be learned from this response that can be carried over when the schools reopen to improve the educational systems in the long term? And I think Simon, for example, and Safikul, you mentioned the role of parents, the empowerment of parents during this time. That definitely is an important component that can strengthen the learning process and education systems in the long term. But I think it would be interesting to hear from you what other components from this crisis response you see as an opportunity to carry forward when the crisis ends, or in the recovery phase of the crisis. Thank you.
So I think that was partially addressed at Simon, and Safika, but if I think any one of you could really answer. So please feel free to respond to Farida's question.
Simon can start, I can then join.
Simon gets to start on all of them.
What a challenging question to try and address. We were all struggling to solve education problems before this. So this has exposed, I think one of the hidden bounties of this pandemic is that it has exposed the inequalities in our societies in a completely new way. Nobody had any illusions that we were living in a perfect world, or that everybody had equitable access to services. But right now what we're seeing is the stark relief of the differences of how people are able to access services and be taken care of by their respective governments and societies. So I would hope that post-pandemic we have a renewed focus on the equity issue, access to school, quality of funding of services, equal across all aspects of society, those kinds of questions. What we're also seeing is the weaknesses of the different technology models that we all have in place. I can just speak from my own personal experience here in the United States. What immediately happened is all classes went online, and children were given hardware, like a Chromebook or something, if they didn't have it. And the assumption was, well, that's it, that's going to be easy. All teachers continue teaching. Younger children, they knew better than to expect a first or second grader to sit in front of a webcam all day. So they sent them home with worksheets, and then older children were sent home with laptops. But as soon as you begin implementing that system, which had never been done on this scale before, you quickly see the problems. The children who are getting the worksheets, many of their parents aren't literate or don't speak the language that the worksheet is written in. And even sitting with a parent who can explain what you're supposed to do with this worksheet, it's a very poor substitute for an actual educational experience. And then the teaching online with those children who did have an internet access and did have a computer, the quality of the teaching was very challenging. There's a lot of technology problems. The teachers themselves were not accustomed to it. So we have no backup systems, is what I'm saying. And what we need are to be prepared for situations like this with rich and robust, resilient distance learning systems that can be brought in at the drop of a hat. Because this isn't the first time that schools have had to be closed. It's simply the first time they've had to be closed at this scale. So we know they'll be closed many times in the future. And we know that those who are the most disadvantaged in our societies, even when schools are open, will continue to struggle to access them. So I think we really need to think deeply about strong distance learning systems that can level the playing field for all learners.
Now, just to join to Simon, the way I look into the COVID, it brought us much closer. Very frankly speaking, I have not thought that after Ebola in Africa, just in a period of 2 years, we would be confronting the COVID. It was out of our imagination. So the biggest challenge COVID really brought that we have to have new level of imagination. Unpredictability is much higher than what we used to thought. So that is creating a new level of opportunity. I am a bit optimist, and from that perspective, I talk that COVID has looked into the pre-COVID, what we had, joining Simon. There was a technological divide. There was a quality divide in education, the gap between the poor and non-poor. there was a huge divide between the children going to school and not going to school. And there was a huge problem with the quality and the whole memorization. Very little space offered to the children to learn. So these were the pre-COVID convention. The COVID challenged all those that it does not work. You have to look for new things. And what is the beginning of the new thing was the technological transformation. That the conventional schooling does not fit. So that was the huge challenge that we had to confront in a very shorter period of time. And you see the resilience and the capacity of all of us, that how quickly we could reorganize ourselves and address to that. So I look into it also as a positive thing. The second, look into the content. That's very important. What we used to really cover in our curriculum. What we are altogether now seeing, a responsible behavior, which is altogether needed to address the copy. A collective effort to address the copy, a bit of empathy. Now, if you just concentrate on these three content areas and look into your pre-COVID curriculum reference, what percentage these three content represent? Not big, not huge. It was all for, a certain orientation of schooling. So I believe that COVID has created an opportunity that make education relevant to the life, to the community, to the coexistence, which can only happen if we conceptualize ourselves, whether within a country, a community, or on the planet, that it is one collective. We are all dealing with the children, and we are all human beings. And I hope that we together would be creating the new convention. And that's why I thought that it would be a new normal and not a pre-COVID normal that we are going to really create. And we can create that. And we need to have that. And that can only happen, going to your earlier question, Sabrina, where parents take a serious call, because it is again together. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I think it's so important for us to remember that we really are in so many ways going into a new normal, and that we have to look at different ways of more flexible, more equitable ways of making sure that education is delivered. We had a question from Christina. I think you're unmuted, Christina. So if you want to go ahead and pose that question.
Thank you very much. Am I indeed? Okay, thank you.
Yes, you are indeed unmuted.
And thank you so much, Safikul, for these really important statements, especially regarding the opportunities, because, and as Sam was stating, so much has been revealed about the impact of the inequities of our systems that we know about dealing with these disadvantaged students all over the world. But the other point you made, Safikul, about, it was just an anecdote of how radio repair people are being very active right now in order to respond to a new demand for radios. It brings us to the fact of what are the technologies that people often have access to. And I think it is, once again, a great opportunity to look at what do people already have access to and how can we use them, much as what Simon was saying about how there are existing programs and how can they be adapted. And so my question to you all is, with regard to the fundamental actors in our systems, the governments, the ministries of education, I believe there's a great deal of enthusiasm about, because of the great need in terms of distance education formats, but how can we support them with various experiences and basically working with ministries now, either to help them understand what is available so it can be adapted and making sure those adaptations work, or maybe getting the engagement to actually do, there is some necessary investment at the beginning when you're trying to put together distance education programming, because you do have to record and develop, and there is initial investment that, but then afterwards it becomes very economical. So I'm just wondering what your ideas are about working with ministries of education to support them in the next phase.
Thank you, Christina. One of the important thing at this point of time, I think most Ministry of Education, particularly in the developing part of the world, whether it is in Asia
I think
or
we've
Africa.
lost.
Do you hear me?
Sadika, I think your connection is, yeah, your connection is a little spotty. So I might just maybe while it comes back, I may go ahead and ask if Tariq or Simon have a response so that we can get you back your voice back.
Actually, Sabrina, I could hear him no problem. I'm wondering if it was on your end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of low connectivity parts of the world, I am currently sitting in one in Southwest Oklahoma. So it may be me. Sorry about that.
Well, thank you, Sabrina. Perhaps I can talk a bit loudly. Now, the important question is for the ministries to realize about their capacity. What are their strengths? Which are the areas where they do not have right amount of capacity to deliver, particularly during COVID and designing the post-COVID? And this is an area where we need really a strong conversation with the ministries. And I just assume that many of us would be really giving attention to these areas. When I say capacity, one of the key perspectives would be that it is not the duty of the Ministry of Education alone to handle the entire education. In fact, no Ministry of Education can do it itself, because this is an area where you need to really put together the connecting the dots, because teacher is the fundamental important that we have little talked about. And then of course the technology and the policies and the new domain that we are bringing is the whole penetration, whether we talk of telephone or the internet. So it's much more multidimensional. The post-COVID education would be compared to the pre-COVID. Now, if we put the Ministry of Education's capacity in that framework, then we would be realizing that Ministry of Education has an important role really to coordinate, to make the resources available, to have the right legal framework for our participation, and very important, to have the right governance, whether we talk of compliance, whether we talk of transparency, because this is an important area that we really need to work in a with rigor, so that the post-COVID new normal really delivers the promises that we see at this point of time.
Thank you for that. I want to, just for the sake of getting to a few more questions, and I'm sure each one of you has a response to that, and maybe we can find a way to get some of these questions offline, and if you would like to respond to them, we can post them along with some of the other materials on the website. But I do want to get to a couple other questions. We have a question from Mary. She says that each of you has mentioned in different ways a mindset as a challenge. Where do you see opportunities in the COVID-19 challenge for governments to become more open to flexible education offers? So Tariq, maybe if you want to start off with.
Okay, well, I think the challenge at the part of the ministries is that are they really open to take the advantage of this disruption and transform their system? Many government funded, government run education institutions, at least in the part of the world that I am, and I'm working very closely with some of the government schools, we find the infrastructure, of course, is substandard. It's a very cost inefficient model, and the quality of learning is very, very poor. So if we think from the perspective of taking the advantage of this situation, I think there is an excellent opportunity to remake the whole education system. However, what my experience is that there is a resistance to change, and we are still sitting like that this thing is going to be over and the business usual will be back. And I think this is something which we need to resist, and that is where the advocacy comes into effect, that we need to encourage and cooperate with the governments and with the ministries to talking about that. Let's see what was going wrong and how, when we reopen, we can bring certain reforms to enhance the quality. And my expectation is that the non-governmental actors, be they private sector or social sector, their actors are going to be far more vibrant to take the advantage of the situation, which would be good. There will be more role of technology in education, which will actually allow us to reach many more children through technology, which we cannot otherwise. And also, I can see a rising trend of homeschooling, and because for the middle class and for the private schooling, which a lot of parents would prefer to go to a private school than a public school because of the quality concern, it is a big economic drain for them. The high cost of education for their children sometimes is like 30 to 50% of their total monthly earning. And there might be some better quality solutions available at the low cost. So I think at the government, if there is a vision, then it is an excellent opportunity to enhance the quality and make the education system far more vibrant and cost effective and high quality. But I'm also a little bit pessimistic that this might not be the case, and many governments will lose this opportunity, and we will fall back on a system which will be further crippled.
Thanks. Thank you. I think that that's something we have to be very conscientious of as we move into what some have referred to as a recovery stage, or the reopening, or as things kind of ease off some of the restrictions, in trying to keep this momentum towards new and flexible ways of educating, and or what we deem as new and flexible, but different ways of educating our children and reach, especially for those who currently don't have access to education. Do any of the others want to quickly respond to that before maybe I can have time for one more question otherwise?
I just want to build on a point that Safiq made earlier. Yes, COVID has exposed the inequalities of our systems, but it has also exposed the inherent unity of the human experience. And I think that education has always been a national issue or a local issue. But what we're seeing here is a unity of communal obstacle or suffering we're all trying to overcome. I would love to see governments work together to coordinate resources, combine resources, and make a system which is almost akin to an international curriculum. I know education is extremely problematic and full of political issues, but there are fundamentals that we all agree on. You know, the STEM subjects and the teaching of major world languages. We already have an international accidental curriculum, because anyone who graduates from a high school system anywhere in the world can have access to any university in the world. So we already have basic agreement. So why can't we take the next step and create a highly resourced, universally accessible distance learning program on the basic academic subjects that we have universal agreement on, and make this available to everyone? for use, whether it's an earthquake or it's COVID-20 or whatever's coming in the future.
There's an interesting point of reflection and a challenge to us. Thank you for that, Simon. And also another way to look at possible ways forward. I'm going to, I think we have time. Well, actually, we don't have time, sorry, for one more question. We're going to, if for those of you whose questions remain unanswered, I'm sorry, we ran out of time. I think we had a very rich discussion on this topic. Hopefully we can find a way to maybe address some of your questions, especially those that were specifically addressed to a particular presenter or organization offline. I would like to just, in summary, kind of close with a few things that I think I took away from this, and some of that is the need for flexible programming, leveraging past experience either from your own organization or from that of other organizations, and really taking on those lessons learned. That parents are our first educators, and that they have a very important role to play in the education of their children. We can't just depend on the teacher. That learning does not, and education does not just happen in the space of a school. And so again, that leans to the flexibility and the need to look at different ways of what education means and how we educate. And then the question of, can education or distance education be one of quality, and really working to, in this new way of education, trying to, or an old way in some ways, but a broader expanse of this way of educating our children, to really push for a quality distance education. And the idea that the impact of the current situation and this current pandemic is going to impact or play out very differently for those who are below the poverty line and those who are the most marginalized. And that we really need to, as educators and as global actors, we need to be conscientious of that and ensure that we are not enforcing inequalities that are inherent in the system, but working towards trying to level out the playing field and create a more equitable education system and the more equitable opportunities for the most marginalized children. I will ask our panelists if they have any final words before just kind of closing this up. Anyone? No. Okay, so with that, I do want to let you know that we have or will be pushing a copy of the full presentation, the video of this, onto our website in the next couple of days. There is a copy of the PowerPoint presentations already made available to you through the handout section of your control panel that you can access right now. And then I would like to invite you to the follow-up of, this is a 4-part series. So the next webinar in our series on keeping children learning will be the 3rd Wednesday of July, which I can't remember right now what that date is, but the 3rd Wednesday of July. And the subtopic will be the role of community engagement and how to engage and mobilize communities to continue education and children's learning and prepare children to return to school. So we will be posting more information on that on our website in a couple coming weeks. So please keep looking an eye out for that. And we will also be sending out invitations. I'd like to thank our panelists for the very deep and profound and very relevant discussion points. And you've given us a lot to kind of mull over and think about, and a few challenges I think that you've issued to us. So thank you for that. And thank you for all of you who have attended. It was great to see so many of you, and I wish we could have had more time to get to all of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Tariq and Simon.
Thank you very much, Sophie and Tariq.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.